Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at, well, a pretty intense concept. It sounds like something straight out of advanced math, maybe.
Right, 5,421 years. But our sources, they're arguing this isn't just math. They say it's the engine mapping the deep cycles of human history.
Exactly. We're diving into this 54111 model. It uses complex numbers, believe it or not, to map this constant and frankly accelerating swing between fantasy and reality.
It's a powerful framework, definitely challenging. We've gathered sources applying it specifically to the next, 35 years?
Yeah.
2025 through 2060.
Yeah, a critical window.
And our mission today is pretty clinical. We're just following the model script. It predicts a huge market correction, one that might already be starting, then a whole societal reset afterwards, and looking ahead to, well, whatever big new fantasy is inevitably coming next.
Okay, so before we dive into the actual phases, the $1, $2, and all that, let's just nail down this core tension. Why I in dollars? Why this back and forth?
Because the sources argue we need both. As humans, as societies. $1 is reality. It's the hard limits, the physics, the facts on the ground. It's also, suffering, entropy, things we can't avoid.
The tough stuff.
The tough stuff. And in dollars. That's the imaginary unit in math, but here it stands for fantasy. Pure hope, transcendence, dreaming big, speculative value, possibility itself.
Okay, so the danger is too much of either.
Precisely. Too much reality, too much a dollar, and society stagnates. It falls into despair, gets crushed by limits, but too much fantasy, too much dollar. You detach from the ground truth. You get delusion, bubbles, collapse.
So it's a balancing act. The sources call it learning to dance between $1.
That's the idea. A kind of harmonic resonance. But as you hinted, that dance floor, it's about to get pretty violent. Like a mosh pit, maybe?
A violent mosh pit. Okay, let's get into the framework itself then. Part one. The 54111 cycle and this idea of acceleration.
Right. So think of the complex plane, like a compass. East is reality, that's $1. North is fantasy, that's $9. History, according to this model, moves around this circle.
And it always kicks off heading north towards dollars.
Movies. I won. That's the first phase. $90 to north. New fantasy. Pure, unbridled possibility. Think of the buzz around, early AI hype, longevity breakthroughs, consciousness uploads.
Right when the dream is everything.
Exactly. Investment pours in based only on that dream, on the promise. There are no real revenues yet, maybe just the idea of them. It's all belief.
But reality always bites back. It drags that fantasy towards the east-west axis, towards the real numbers.
Which takes us to I-22. Mathematically, I squared is $1 on our compass, directly west. This is the loss realization phase.
-1, negative reality.
Yes. The fantasy's momentum pushed it past reality into the negative. This is crucial. The sources say this is when those impossible $1 promises become actual, undeniable losses. The bubble bursts. Speculation crashes.
And that negative momentum, that crash, it doesn't just stop at $1. It keeps going.
It keeps going down. $33. That's I-23 mathematically. 217 thirds, straight south on the compass. The despair and reflection phase.
-$. Negative fantasy.
Sort of. It's the deep trough. Society, markets, they're forced into this negative imaginary wilderness, reevaluating everything, picking through the wreckage, adjusting structures. It's painful but necessary.
Which finally, slowly, brings us back around full circle to 545 to core.
4 days feels a while.
Yeah.
Back to the east axis. Positive reality, the new baseline.
Stability?
Stability, yes. But a specific kind. The value, the hype, the imaginary part, it's completely purged. Gone. Only the practical, real value, the dollar, remains, whatever the technology or idea actually delivered.
It's like a purification rite almost. Painful, but leaves a solid foundation.
A foundation based on facts, efficiency, proven utility, not speculation.
Okay, here's a philosophical kicker, though. If I-400-11 is stable reality, why can't we just stay there? Why not just enjoy the stability?
Because, the sources argue, I-401 isn't a destination. It's instantaneous. The moment stability is achieved, the very second the baseline is set.
We start dreaming again.
Exactly. Human ambition, creativity, that deep need for hope, for more than just baseline reality, it immediately starts planting the seeds for the next $1 sun. There's no after 5 dollars, only the next cycle beginning. Stability for us, it's boring, it's temporary.
Which leads directly to the big danger sign flashing right now, the acceleration of these cycles. The cycle is permanent, okay, but the speed we run through it, that's the variable causing chaos.
This is maybe the most alarming finding in the sources for our century. Historically, these cycles took time, allowed for reflection. The agricultural revolution cycle, millennia.
Right.
The industrial revolution, maybe a century and a half. The information age, the dot-com boom and bust and integration. maybe 3 decades.
And now the AI revolution, the cycle we're in right now.
The sources are suggesting this current AI cycle, from the peak fantasy we might be just leaving to the necessary 5-4-1-1 reality check, could complete in as little as 10 years.
10 years, that's
Yeah.
insane acceleration. What's driving that speed?
Global information flow, capital liquidity moving at light speed, technology diffusing almost instantly across borders. It's exponential.
Okay, so why is that speed, that acceleration, such a threat? Why perpetual chaos?
Because if the cycle spins too fast, we don't get enough time in 5-3-3, the reflection phase, or IFAR-3, the stability phase,
We don't have time to learn.
or to integrate the lessons, or repair the damage from the crash, or build resilience, before, bam, the next massive $1 fantasy sweeps us up again. We risk getting locked in this dizzying spin cycle.
Yeah.
Extreme hope, then extreme despair, then hope, then despair, never truly stable, never truly learning, just
Yeah.
oscillating wildly.
Okay, that sets a pretty grim stage. Let's apply this framework to right now then, part 2. The immediate crash, what the sources call the Great Reckoning, predicted for roughly 2025 to 2032. Where are we now in that compass?
The diagnosis from the sources for early 2025 is very specific and quite stark. We're at 165 degrees.
165 degrees. Okay, remind us where that is.
180 Thurks is IDELR, is 911. It's peak loss realization, the crash itself. So $165 surge. We're just 15 degrees away from the cliff edge. Still in the fantasy hangover zone, but the ground is sloping down fast towards negative reality.
We've passed peak fantasy, peak $.
Definitely. And the market metrics they use back this up, particularly something they call reality resonance or Trex market.
Reality resonance, what does that measure?
It's basically a ratio. How much of a current market price is based on actual existing revenues and proven value, the $1 part, versus how much is based on projected future growth, narratives, hype the other part.
And the current reading?
4.233.
0.23. So
Okay.
only 23 cents of every dollar invested right now is based on current reality.
And 77 cents is pure future fantasy. That's why the sources predict such a violent snapback to the real axis, that 77 cents of imaginary value has to evaporate.
Okay, let's walk through the predicted phases of this crash. Phase 1, the earnings shock. This is when 2026-2021 hits hard. Predicted for 2026-2027, the sources pinpoint specific triggers.
Yeah, cascading triggers. The first domino, symbolically at least, is predicted to be an NVIDIA earnings miss in Q2 2026.
NVIDIA. Okay, why them specifically?
Because they've become the bellwether, the financial proxy for this whole AI infrastructure gold rush. Their stock price assumes this continuous, almost infinite, exponential growth in GPU demand. A single big miss there. It shatters the foundational belief for the whole sector.
But it's not just one company's miss, is it? It's systemic. The money spent isn't generating the expected returns fast enough.
That's the second trigger. A sharp, sudden spike in depreciation costs hitting the big AI players, Google, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft. They've spent hundreds of billions on data centers, specialized chips, massive CapEx.
Right.
When the projected high-margin AI services revenue doesn't arrive on schedule, that huge CapEx spend turns into a massive drag on profits via depreciation. It's the tide on hitting the balance sheet. Imagine future money becomes real present loss.
And the sources predict a specific financial crisis event, too. Something about an Oracle incident.
Yes. They predict a financial shock event 10 times the scale of something they call the Oracle incident from a previous cycle. Apparently, that incident was a highly leveraged, speculative blow-up that nearly caused a systemic liquidity freeze.
So 10 times that. We're talking 2008 scale.
Potentially, yes. Especially as they predicted happening almost simultaneously with the bankruptcy of a major systemically important crypto exchange,
Yeah.
adding fuel to the fire.
Wow. Okay, so that sequence. NVIDIA shock, the depreciation bomb hitting profits, a major liquidity crunch, and a crypto collapse.
Yeah.
That's the cascade into the Great Reckoning. What's the scale of the damage? The predicted losses.
Immense, because the speculation is so concentrated. AI-related stocks are projected down between, say, 35% and 60%.
Okay.
But the headline number, the sources predict a $3.2 trillion evaporation in market cap, mostly from big tech.
3.2 trillion.
Yeah.
That's hard to even comprehend. How does that much value just disappear? Where does it go?
It disappears because it was never really there. It was the dollar value, the 77 cents on the dollar. It was based on the fantasy of unlimited future growth. Once the NVIDIA miss happens, once the depreciation hits the books, the market brutally corrects that Rorkex market ratio back towards $1.
And the leverage unwinds.
Exactly. Funds using those inflated tech stocks as collateral get margin called. Forced selling accelerates the downward spiral. Even the hardware guys, the semiconductor and HBM makers, they're projected to take a 40% hit. Huge impact on economies heavily reliant on chip exports.
And once the money evaporates like that, the story, the narrative, has to flip.
Instantly. Overnight, the wild hope turns to bitter disillusionment. The dominant narrative becomes AI was a fraud, we got fooled again, it's just the dot-com bubble 2.0.
That cynical narrative shift is actually part of the process.
Essential. It's the collective psychological cleansing of that imaginary value. It prepares everyone for the next phase, the hard work of rebuilding.
Which brings us to phase two, restructuring and pragmatism. This is the deep trough of $3 IWIL's I-1, projected for 2027 to 2029, the structural correction.
And the structural pain, massive layoffs. Sources point to potentially 40% cuts at heavily exposed firms like Meta, maybe 30% at Microsoft, companies that overbuilt data center capacity, forced sell-offs, fire sales.
But this infrastructure, the hardware, it doesn't just vanish, so there's a silver lining maybe.
There is. This leads to, fascinatingly, a boom in the used GPU market. All that hardware bought for speculative, maybe AGI-level dreams, it now gets repurposed for practical, lower-cost enterprise AI applications.
So the focus shifts.
Completely. From speculative hype about AI as a sector to the boring reality of AI as a utility, like plumbing or electricity, just is.
What about governments during this trough? Do they step in?
Aggressively, they have to. They designate the core AI infrastructure, the surviving data centers, the key chip supply chains as strategic national assets. They can't let the plumbing fail.
And the job losses?
That forces wider adoption of UBI experiments. Universal basic income trials get scaled up significantly, globally, as a direct response to the mass unemployment caused by the crash and the ongoing, now more pragmatic, automation rollout.
Okay, so that painful adjustment period, that I-333 lower base, eventually leads us out. Phase 3, the new equilibrium, back to $101 around 2029 to 2032.
Yes, the cycle completes. The dollars is purged. The $1 won, the real value remains. AI gets integrated everywhere, but quietly, as a general-purpose technology.
Like electricity was in the 1920s.
Exactly the parallel the sources use. They call it the AI electrification period. You stop investing in AI companies and start investing in every company based on how well they use AI to become more efficient. This I-4111 state creates that clean, reality-based starting line for the 2030s.
All right, let's move into that world then. Part 3, the I-4111 world from 2030 to 2040. The new baseline reality after the Great Reckoning. What does the economy look like? The global GDP breakdown for, say, 2035.
The projected figures really show that shift back to tangible value. Traditional manufacturing bounces back significantly, projected at 22% of global GDP.
Wow, manufacturing.
Yeah, reshoring, automation, making it viable again. Pragmatic AI, the utility layer, settles at around 18%. Renewable energy makes a big jump to 15%. And interestingly, the local economy sector rises to 12%.
Local economy up to 12%. That suggests a real pullback from hyper-globalization, doesn't it?
It does. The crash makes everyone acutely aware of supply chain fragility. Capital flows back towards things you can touch, things that are geographically close and resilient. Less reliance on complex, brittle global networks.
Let's dig into that manufacturing revival. Reshoring 2.0. Why does heavy industry actually come back to places like the US and Europe where costs were previously prohibitive?
Well, it's not the old kind of manufacturing. Several drivers. One, definitely the memory of pandemic disruptions and geopolitical risks. Companies demand regional resilience now. Two, the crash was a brutal lesson. Real assets hold value when the imaginary assets, the echolard, vanish. Investors want factories, not just code.
And the third driver, technology itself.
That's the key. The massive investment in AI, the stuff that caused the bubble, it finally gets monetized efficiently through highly automated factories. Robots, AI-driven logistics, AI quality control.
So it's not about cheap labor anymore. It's about smart machines restoring the competitive edge.
Precisely. U.S. and European manufacturing can compete again on price and quality because of automation, integrated AI. This starts to erode the previous dominance of, say, Chinese mass manufacturing, leading to more diverse regional production hubs focused on self-sufficiency.
Okay, now the energy paradox. You mentioned renewables jumped to 15%. How did the collapse of the super energy-hungry AI sector actually accelerate the green transition? Seems counterintuitive.
It's deeply ironic, but maybe the AI bubble's most positive legacy. In the mid-2020s fantasy phase, the uncontrolled growth of AI data centers created this sudden, completely unsustainable spike in power demand. Gigawatts upon gigawatts, like adding several new countries to the grid overnight.
The fantasy created an energy monster it couldn't feed.
Exactly. The power crisis triggered by this was so severe, so destabilizing, that during the 5333 restructuring phase, governments were forced to treat energy supply as a critical national security issue.
So it wasn't just market forces, it was state intervention.
Mandatory emergency-level intervention, pouring money into whatever could be built fast. Massive solar farms, grid-scale battery storage, and importantly, small modular nuclear reactors, SMRs. The crisis forced their hand.
So the sheer scale of the problem forced the reality shift.
It did. By 2040, the sources project fossil fuels drop significantly, maybe to around 18% of the global mix. Solar and wind take up much of the slack. The AI bubble inadvertently paid for the energy transition we needed, but were too slow to fund otherwise.
Fascinating. Okay, politically, what happens? Big tech's power peaked, then crashed. What fills the vacuum? The sources talk about neo-sovereignty.
Yes, the nation-state makes a comeback. Big time. It's a fundamental realignment. Governments realize they need to insulate themselves from these wild, tech-driven boom and bust cycles, so they reassert control through three main pillars.
Pillar 1.
Digital sovereignty. This means things like mandatory data localization, forcing companies to store citizen data within the country's borders. Strict rules on algorithmic transparency. Heavy fines for platforms that don't comply. The state, not Silicon Valley, controls the information flow.
Okay. Pillar 2. Control over the tech itself.
Technological sovereignty. Massive state investment, even protectionism, to build domestic capacity in critical hardware, especially high-end semiconductors, and fostering national AI champions, proprietary models. The goal: no country should be existentially dependent on a rival for its core 21st century infrastructure.
Makes sense. And the third pillar connects back to that energy crisis.
Energy sovereignty. After the scare, energy infrastructure is formally designated a strategic security asset. Expect heavy regulation, maybe price controls, serious debates about nationalizing parts of the grid to ensure resilience, especially against climate shocks or cyber threats.
So the state gets much more involved in tech and energy. Now let's look at the tech itself in this pragmatic VI 4141 era. What AI actually worked and delivered real value by 2040?
The successes are all very utilitarian, grounded. Medical AI is a big one. Getting to 95% plus accuracy in diagnosing certain cancers, revolutionizing personalized medicine protocols based on genetic markers and AI analysis.
Okay, what else?
Education AI moves beyond just testing. It starts creating genuinely dynamic, personalized learning paths for students. And as we discussed, AI-driven optimization becomes the absolute bedrock of the manufacturing revival and supply chain management.
But the big, flashy $1 dreams from the 2020s, AGI, conscious machines.
Still firmly in the realm of science fiction by 2040, according to these sources. AGI is not achieved. Level 5, fully autonomous driving. Still not ready for mass deployment, maybe indefinitely postponed for complex urban areas. The idea of strong consciousness or mind uploading? Nope. The reality check showed biological complexity was vastly underestimated.
So AI becomes powerful, but kind of boring, more like a super spreadsheet.
In a way, yes. Powerful utility, not magic. But while AI grounds itself, biotech makes some huge leaps that immediately stir the pot.
What kind of leaps?
We see advanced gene therapies, building on CRISPR, becoming much more common, moving from lab to clinic. Big progress in synthetic biology, using biological processes for manufacturing, creating personalized organs maybe.
And the outcome?
The sources project a tangible extension of average health span by maybe 10 to 15 years. That's a huge win for reality for the dollar's point. But it instantly fuels massive ethical storms.
About access, playing God.
All of it. Who gets these therapies? Does it create a biological class divide? What does it mean for retirement ages, resource allocation? That throws up huge societal questions, even as it delivers real health benefits.
And space. What happened to the Mars colonization fantasy?
That gets a major reality check, too. Space shifts back from being this romantic final frontier narrative to being a hard-nosed research lab and infrastructure platform.
So no cities on Mars by 2040.
Definitely not. Crewed Mars missions. Pushed back to 2045, maybe 2050 at the earliest. The whole colonization discourse kind of fades, replaced by practical work on sustainable moon bases for resource extraction research and using orbital assets for Earth observation, climate monitoring, communication. The $1 space hype gets purged, leaving the dollar of actual science and geopolitics.
Right. So the world of 2030, 2040 is more grounded, more focused on resilience, maybe more state-controlled in key sectors. But we know 5-4 is temporary. Part 4. The next wave of fantasy. Around 2035, 2045, the pressure builds for a new $1 world. What are the candidates?
Humanity just can't live in pure dollars for long. The need for transcendence, for the next big thing, it bubbles up again. The sources identify four main contenders for the next iDollar cycle. They all tend to start from a real need, a dollar or Thurvin, but then spiral into dollar fantasy.
Candidate number one.
Consciousness technology, leveraging those biotech and neurotech advances.
What's the fantasy of the dollar?
Oh, it's potent. Consciousness upload, digital immortality, merging with AI to become superhuman via advanced brain-computer interfaces,
Yeah.
overcoming the limits of flesh, basically.
And the reality of the dollar, that will likely remain after that bubble bursts.
Genuine breakthroughs in treating neurological diseases, effective therapies for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, maybe repairing spinal cord injuries, advanced sensory aids for blindness or deafness, cognitive tools to help with memory or learning. The medical necessity funds the transcendence fantasy. It's the same pattern as AI.
Okay. Candidate two, the longevity economy, taking that 10-15-year health span extension and running with it.
Exactly. This one aims directly at defeating the ultimate $1 constraint, death itself. The fantasy gets really aggressive here. Aging is just a disease we can cure. Living to 150 is achievable. Maybe even whispers of death could become a choice.
Very powerful fantasy. What's the $1, the likely reality?
The continued incremental extension of health span. Maybe getting that extra 10, 20 years of healthy, active life becomes mainstream for many, reducing the burden of geriatric diseases. Still a massive achievement.
But the sources flag a huge risk with this one specifically.
A massive risk, extreme inequality. These advanced longevity treatments will almost certainly be incredibly expensive at first, available only to the ultra-wealthy.
Creating biological castes.
Potentially. Imagine a world where the rich routinely live active lives to 100 or 110, while others don't. It could shatter social cohesion, exacerbate generational conflicts over resources. It destabilizes the fundamental social contract based on shared mortality. Big, big risk.
Right. Candidate three, climate engineering, or geoengineering. Given the ongoing climate crisis, the temptation to find a big tech fix must be enormous.
Huge temptation. This is the fantasy of total control. We can design the planet's climate. We can fully reverse global warming. And the really dangerous part of the fantasy, there will be no major unintended side effects.
Yeah, that last part sounds unlikely. What's the more sober reality of the dollar?
Probably partial, perhaps localized successes, effective carbon capture technologies deployed at scale, maybe some regional weather modification or adaptation efforts that actually work without causing disaster elsewhere, things that help us manage the symptoms, not magically cure the disease.
And the risks here are existential.
Absolutely. Catastrophic, unpredictable side effects are the obvious one, messing with ocean currents, atmospheric chemistry, triggering droughts or floods halfway across the world. But the other huge risk is geopolitical weaponization.
Using climate control as a weapon.
If a nation gains the ability to, say, reliably steer rainfall or intensify storms, that becomes the ultimate tool of power politics. It turns climate itself into a potential domain of warfare. Extremely dangerous territory.
Okay. And the fourth candidate, most esoteric one, the quantum neural paradigm.
This is the convergence zone. Quantum computing finally starts maturing, advanced AI continues to evolve, and our understanding of the brain deepens.
Why is this one so prone to mystification?
Because quantum physics is just weird, non-intuitive. So the fantasy immediately gets tangled up with philosophical and even mystical ideas. Quantum consciousness, telepathy via quantum entanglement, blurring lines between mind and machine in ways that sound more New Age than scientific.
What's the likely reality behind that?
Genuinely revolutionary new computing capabilities from quantum systems. Maybe new AI architectures inspired by quantum principles or brain structures. Powerful tools. But the sources warn this area will be a magnet for pseudoscience and delusion, precisely because the underlying science is so abstract and hard for most people to grasp.
So we jump from the AI hype train onto one of these four new ones. Consciousness, longevity, geoengineering, quantum. Does one pose a bigger structural threat than the others as the next big bubble?
Geoengineering obviously carries immense physical risk if it goes wrong, but the sources seem to suggest the longevity economy might pose the most immediate structural threat to social stability.
Because of the inequality.
Because it strikes right at the heart of the social contract.
Yeah.
That immediate visceral unfairness, some people buying extra decades of life, could trigger political and social upheaval far faster and more intensely than the others. The next windy $8 crash fueled by longevity might be less financial, more revolutionary.
Grim thought. Okay, let's zoom out further. Part 5. Long-term trajectories, looking towards 2045, 2060. Beyond the next fantasy cycle, what are the huge, slow-moving structural forces shaping the mid-century?
Two inescapable giants dominate the source's long-term view: demographic collapse and climate catastrophe. Even after the 5411 reset and the next fantasy wave, these realities grind on.
Demographics first. Global population peaks. Right. Around 9.7 billion by 2050.
Yes, but the real story isn't the global peak. It's the internal collapse within many advanced and middle-income nations. The population pyramids are inverting.
You mentioned South Korea as an extreme case earlier.
The projections are startling. South Korea's population potentially shrinking to 42 million by 2050, and the median age hitting 58.
58. That's
Yeah.
a society of elders.
Primarily, yes. And in that context, deploying AI and robotics isn't about boosting productivity for growth anymore. It becomes structurally necessary just to keep basic services running: healthcare for the elderly, logistics, maintaining infrastructure with far fewer young workers.
Which must create enormous social pressures.
Immense pressure. Fierce competition between generations for shrinking public resources like pensions and healthcare. The pragmatic 54111 technology becomes essential, but it exists within this highly stressed social environment. Tech is a requirement, not a choice, and that changes everything.
Okay, and alongside this demographic shift, the climate crisis continues its relentless march. The sources aren't optimistic about hitting global targets.
Brutally honest, actually. The baseline prediction is a failure to meet the Paris Agreement goals, leading to a world that's maybe plus 2.7 degrees Celsius warmer by mid-century.
And the consequences of that.
Devastatingly real. We're
Yeah.
talking potentially 100 to 200 million climate refugees displaced by sea level rise, desertification, water scarcity, recurrent severe food crises hitting multiple regions due to extreme weather disrupting agriculture, and increased international friction, potentially conflict, over dwindling resources like fresh water and fertile land. It's a harsh reality.
It sounds almost apocalyptic, but you mentioned a paradox earlier that this crisis forces some positive changes.
Yes, the paradox of catastrophe. The sheer scale and undeniable reality of climate change becomes so overwhelming that it acts as this terrible unwanted catalyst. It forces innovation, maybe making risky geoengineering seem necessary, and perhaps more importantly, it forces a level of international cooperation, however grudging, just to manage shared survival challenges. Reality backs humanity into a corner where it has to act collectively.
Okay, so amidst these huge pressures, aging societies, climate stress, the whiplash of tech cycles, the sources predict a long-term societal response, a shifting values called the Great Awakening of the Senses. What is that?
It's presented as a slow, almost subconscious cultural adjustment, a collective fatigue with digital abstraction, with the constant churn of a dollar, a deep societal yearning to reconnect with the tangible, the physical, the real.
How does that manifest?
Several key trends emerge. A big one is localism, reinvesting in local economies, prioritizing local food production for resilience, strengthening community bonds, a pushback against rootless globalism.
And a shift in our relationship with technology.
Yes, leading to more interest in low-tech. Not rejecting technology, but valuing things that are sustainable, durable, repairable, made from regenerative materials. It's a quiet rebellion against the culture of disposable gadgets and planned obsolescence.
Sounds like wanting more control over time, too.
That's temporal sovereignty, resisting the constant acceleration, the 247 demand for instant response, valuing slowness, deep work, respecting natural biological and seasonal rhythms, pushing back against the tyranny of the algorithm and the notification.
It feels like an attempt to reground ourselves.
Exactly. And the final element is a conscious effort towards reconnection with nature, promoting ecological literacy, environmental education, not just as science, but as lived experience. This whole awakening is seen as society building an anchor, trying to ensure that even when the next Eidolon fantasy inevitably arrives, more people retain a strong connection to physical reality, to the dollar.
Philosophically, then, if we keep cycling through 54111, making the same kinds of mistakes, inequality, environmental damage, are we just stuck? Is it a flat circle?
The sources argue no. They introduce this idea of spiral evolution. Yes, we repeat the same structural patterns. The 54111 cycle itself seems baked into human nature, inevitable. We chase fantasies, we crash, we rebuild from reality. But crucially, learning occurs, especially during that painful 5003 reflection phase. Each time we go through the cycle, we integrate some lessons, however imperfectly. So the results of the repetition are slightly different each time. We don't land back in the exact same spot.
We move upwards, or at least sideways.
Upwards, hopefully. It's a spiral, not a flat loop.
Yeah.
2060 will face similar structural challenges to 2025, but the context, the tools, the cumulative understanding will be different. That slight upward tilt, that learned wisdom, is our only real defense against the chaos of the accelerating cycles.
Okay, to really drive home this idea of learning from cycles, the sources use a striking historical analogy. Alexander the Great at the Battle of Gaugamela, 331 BC. Why that ancient battle for today's AI era?
It serves as this perfect, stark metaphor for fantasy versus reality. Dalder. Darius, the Persian king, had overwhelming numbers, chariots with scythes, elephants, immense spectacle, pure dollar. He represented the fantasy of power through sheer scale and visual intimidation.
And Alexander?
Alexander had a smaller but highly disciplined, tightly integrated Macedonian phalanx. Superior training, tactics, cohesion, pure $1. He represented the reality of power through effective organization, discipline, and integrated execution. Darius relied on the idea of his army. Alexander relied on the function of his.
And Alexander won decisively. So what are the Gaugamela lessons for us, facing our own potential reckoning with AI fantasy?
3 core structural truths, the sources say. First, technology is a beginning, not an end. Inventing powerful AI models. That was just the start, like Alexander having soldiers. The hard part is integrating them effectively. Invention is easy, integration is hard. We celebrated the invention of LLMs, the Eureka moment. But the societal, economic, ethical integration, that's the Gaugamela battlefield, where success is actually determined and where most efforts fail.
And the third, perhaps most relevant for the current hype.
Success breeds arrogance. The initial triumphs, the dazzling demos, the soaring stock prices, they create a dangerous overconfidence, a belief in the fantasy that ignores the underlying realities and limitations. That arrogance is what sets the stage for the inevitable twice dollar 280 wills as a non-correction.
And didn't Alexander himself, despite his Gaugamela brilliance, later fall victim to his own success-fueled arrogance, pushing too far, leading to mutiny and ultimately an early death, a kind of forced 5-4-on-1-1 reality check?
A perfect historical echo of the cycle. He mastered the reality of battle, but eventually succumbed to the fantasy of limitless conquest. The sources strongly imply that our current tech euphoria mirrors Darius's pre-battle confidence focused on the spectacle of $1, neglecting the disciplined integration of $1.
All right, let's bring this all together in the outro. We've traced the 5-4-1-1-1 cycle, pinpointed the triggers for that predicted $3.2 trillion crash, looked at the AI electrification and neo-sovereign world that follows, and even scouted the candidates for the next fantasy wave starting around 2035.
The model, the 5-4-1-1-1 framework, it gives us a map of the terrain. It shows the structure of the journey. A crash is coming. A new fantasy will rise after. That seems structurally inevitable. But the map doesn't dictate how we navigate it. Our response isn't predetermined.
And speaking of responses, the sources conclude with this final, quite poignant provocation, a kind of synthesized message from a future simulation, framed as a letter from 2060 looking back at us now in 2025.
Oh.
What's the core advice from that future perspective?
The future observer confirms what we might suspect. The future isn't simple. It's not a clean utopia or a total dystopia. It's complex, messy, human. But the single most vital piece of advice, the distilled wisdom for surviving these accelerating cycles, is incredibly simple and visceral. It's just, don't lose your senses.
Don't lose your senses. What does that mean, practically?
It means stay grounded, stay connected to the physical world, to the $1. It's the anchor against the powerful pull of $, the seductive delusion of pure fantasy. It means consciously cultivating awareness of, well, the feeling of the earth under your feet, the real rhythm of seasons changing, looking into another person's actual eyes, unmediated by a screen, noticing the physical world around you.
Those undeniable anchors of reality.
They're the only way, the sources suggest, to avoid being completely swept away, completely disoriented as the cycles spin faster and faster.
So the real challenge isn't which fantasy we chase next, consciousness, tech, longevity, whatever it is. The core challenge is whether we, collectively and individually, can keep a firm grip on that tangible reality, on the $1, even as the acceleration tries to shake us loose.
The structural pattern is laid bare now. You, the listener, you understand the framework. You see the crisis looming just 15 degrees away at 108 Xerxes. So the final question the sources leave us with is personal and generational. When this great reckoning hits, when that $3.2 trillion in imaginary value vanishes, which lessons will we actually learn and integrate this time? Will our generation find the discipline of Alexander to secure a slightly higher turn on the spiral? Or will we repeat the arrogance of Darius, guaranteeing another faster, perhaps shallower, ultimately more chaotic loop? The choice, the sources imply, is ours to make within the cycle.